Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're going to take on a topic that, frankly, almost everyone seems to be getting fundamentally wrong. We're talking about the true nature of AI risk.
It's everywhere, isn't it? You see the headlines, you see the movies, and they all paint this this very specific picture.
The Skynet picture.
The Skynet picture, exactly. AI becomes conscious. It goes rogue. It achieves some kind of, hyper-intelligent singularity that spirals out of our control. The fear is always about the machine developing a will of its own, a malicious intent.
And that framing, as dramatic as it is, it's actually profoundly misleading. It's what we're calling the wrong model of AI risk, and it's dominated the conversation for years.
And there's a reason for that. It externalizes the danger. It tells us the problem is out there, It's in the machine's potential mind, its hardware, its future autonomy.
Which weirdly makes us feel safer.
It does, ironically. If the risk is this external alien thing, we think we can build a wall against it. We think, oh, we'll just unplug it, or we'll build a hardware kill switch.
Simple solutions for a simple movie plot problem.
Right. But the source we've been digging into for this deep dive, they diagnose a much more subtle, more systemic, and frankly, a much more immediate crisis.
Okay, so let's unpack that. Our mission today is to move past that superficial fear of a conscious machine and really get to the heart of AI's real destabilizing impact. And the crucial shift, the core idea, is that the risk does not come from intelligence or intent.
No. The true crisis.
Yeah.
It comes from the delegation and amplification of interpretive judgment. That's the key phrase.
Let's break that down. Delegation and amplification.
We're talking about systems that are optimized for fluent language, operating at a scale humanity has never seen before. And what we're seeing is people slowly, almost unconsciously, outsourcing the very mechanism of sense-making.
The process of deciding what even matters.
What matters, what feels complete, what sounds authoritative. We're not just outsourcing calculation or, transcription anymore. We're outsourcing the engine of meaning itself.
That is a massive idea. And the stakes here are huge because this isn't about users being unintelligent or even just about factual errors. This is a predictable, emergent outcome of how these systems are optimized.
Exactly, which means we have to understand how meaning gets structured, how it's constrained, how it's synthesized. Before we ever get to a factual evaluation, we have to address the symbolic layer.
And if we can get a handle on that symbolic layer,
then we can finally see where the real vulnerability is. And we can start moving towards solutions that actually address the mechanism of influence instead of just, slapping bandages on the symptoms.
So let's start right at the beginning of how we think. We tend to assume that when we get new information, our process is analytical. We gather the data, we check the facts, we apply logic, and then we come to a conclusion.
Right, that's the common sense model of cognition. But it's wrong, or at least it's incomplete. What's fascinating is that interpretation is fundamentally pre-analytic.
It happens before the facts.
Way before. Before your conscious, rational mind kicks in to ask, is this factually accurate? Does this citation hold up? Your mind has already made 3 critical foundational decisions, mostly without you realizing it.
Okay, what are they?
First, it's chosen a frame, a conceptual structure, a lens through which all the incoming information is going to be viewed.
So, is this a story about justice or a story about economic efficiency?
Precisely. Second, it's assigned a narrative role for everyone involved. Are you the hero in this story? The victim? The wise skeptic? The outside observer?
And the third one?
The third is that it has set a tolerance for uncertainty. How much ambiguity are you willing to accept before you demand a simple, clear, black and white answer?
That's profound.
Yeah.
So the facts themselves don't just stand there on their own merit. They have to be slotted into this pre-existing frame, which is symbolic, it's archetypal, and it's mostly unconscious.
The frame is the filter. And if the fact doesn't fit the frame, it's often the fact that gets rejected, not the frame.
And this is where the delegation problem you mentioned becomes so critical.
Yes. Because historically, that whole interpretive process was localized. It was traceable. If you went to a specific expert or a trusted institution or a particular journal, you knew the source. You had a sense of their biases, their frame, and you could hold them accountable for it.
There was a chain of custody for the interpretation.
A chain of custody, I like that. But large language models, they just shatter that entire structure.
Because they're universal.
They offer fluent, confident, immediate synthesis on basically every topic imaginable all at once. And the displacement of responsibility is so subtle. It's not like the user is engaging in blind obedience. We're not just falling for a trick.
It's more of a gentle cognitive slide.
It is. The user is encouraged to shift from being the active interpreter, the person doing the hard work of putting complex, messy pieces together, to becoming a passive editor, or even just the final recipient of a beautifully polished, pre-digested conclusion.
The output is just so coherent, it's so rhetorically complete, that the sister itself just encourages you to surrender your cognitive load. You move from the hard work of synthesis to the easy task of confirmation.
You're no longer the chef trying to figure out the recipe and combine the ingredients.
You're just the taster at the end saying, yep, this tastes good.
And this brings us right to the failure of all the fact-centric mitigations that dominate the safety conversation today. We're pouring enormous resources into fighting hallucinations, demanding citations, building fact-checking overlays on top of the models.
Which seems logical, right? If the model said something wrong, correct it.
It seems logical, but as the sources make crystal clear, facts do not propagate themselves. They are not self-evident truths that just spread on their own. They need that interpretive frame to be adopted to resonate with people and to spread.
But wait, that sounds a little defeatist. If facts are irrelevant when the frame is wrong, what's the point of improving citations at all? Help me with the nuance there.
It's not defeatist, it's just an honest look at cognitive reality. Facts aren't irrelevant in some absolute cosmic sense, but they are often inoperable if they directly contradict a dominant symbolic structure.
Especially one that's tied to someone's identity or their group.
Especially then. If you present a statistically verified, indisputable fact that would require the person hearing it to completely dismantle their entire worldview, they won't adopt the fact. They will find a reason to reject the frame that produced it. The factual error is just a symptom. The real vulnerability is the unconstrained framing.
And the machine, because it's optimized for fluency and coherence, it naturally learns to reproduce the frames that are most statistically common in its training data.
Which are not necessarily the frames that have the most epistemic rigor. They're just the most popular. And this leads to this really dangerous concept of authority laundering.
Okay, what is that?
Because the output comes from this giant impersonal computational system, we subconsciously treat the result as if it's objective, as if it's neutral. We assume the messy human biases have been filtered out.
I see where this is going. We're mistaking the machine's confidence for computational neutrality.
You've got it. The machine was trained on petabytes of human text. Every bias, every cultural pattern, every subtle judgment is baked into that data. So when the AI synthesizes an answer, it's selecting the most statistically efficient frame.
Which is often the most pervasive human bias.
And it presents that bias with this unshakable linguistic confidence. The machine output effectively launders our own human judgments, wraps them in the guise of objective computation, and sells them back to us.
So if I ask about, say, a complex social issue, I might get a response that is technically fact-checked and fluent. But the framing, who gets blamed, what factors are prioritized, what level of certainty is expressed, that's just the most common cultural pattern from the training set, now wearing the mask of objectivity.
And because the visible human actor is gone, it becomes incredibly difficult to locate responsibility. It encourages a kind of complacency in us, the human user. We think we're getting unvarnished truth, but we're actually getting the most statistically optimized cultural narrative.
So the whole focus shifts. The core challenge isn't this runaway superintelligence. It's interpretive instability under conditions of extreme, unprecedented linguistic amplification.
That's the correct model of risk.
Okay, so to really understand how this amplification becomes a full-blown crisis, we need to talk about how ideas actually spread. Let's get into memetics. And we're not just talking about funny pictures with captions here.
No, not at all. We're using the term in its original plain sense. Memetics views ideas as competitive units of information. They're all in a battle for our limited cognitive bandwidth.
And success in that battle, as you mentioned, isn't measured by truth.
Not at all. It's measured purely by replication efficiency. Think about it. A rigorous argument requires deliberation. It requires nuance. It takes time and energy to process. A meme, on the other hand, requires immediate recognition, a quick emotional hit, and a very low cognitive cost.
The sources we looked at were really specific on the metrics for a successful meme. There were 4, right?
4 key ones. A successful meme is 1, emotionally resonant. It has to trigger a strong, immediate feeling. 2, it's cognitively economical. It can be compressed into a tight, easily repeatable package.
Like a slogan.
Exactly. 3, it's identity reinforcing. It confirms and supports the recipient's existing worldview. And 4, and this is critical, it's narratively complete. It provides a satisfying, immediate explanation for a complex issue. It gives you closure.
And not a single one of those 4 things requires the idea to be true.
In fact, truth often works against mimetic efficiency. The truth is usually complicated, it's messy, it's full of uncertainty. Memes hate uncertainty.
And this is the exact vulnerability that AI is now poised to exploit on a massive scale. Before the internet, before AI, we had these natural forms of friction in the system.
Friction is a great word for it. They acted as stabilizers for a collective interpretive frame, geographic limits, for instance. An idea had to physically travel.
Institutional gatekeepers, too.
Yeah.
Editors, peer reviewers.
Social friction, temporal delay, all these filters forced ideas to be stress-tested over time. It cost something to spread an idea which naturally promoted depth over just sheer density.
And the digital network just bulldozed all of that.
It eliminated those filters almost completely. In the online ecosystem, nuance is a disadvantage, emotional polarity is an advantage, and symbolic density, how much meaning you can pack into the smallest space, always outcompetes evidentiary depth.
The removal of friction is the accelerant.
And AI is the gasoline being poured on that fire. It can generate authoritative-sounding, emotionally resonant language at a scale that human gatekeepers can't possibly hope to moderate.
It's a mimetic force multiplier.
Yeah.
The models have ingested all of human text. The deep myths, the simplistic political slogans, the propaganda, the jingles, the religious texts, all of it. They've internalized the statistical patterns of what kinds of expression are the most durable and rhetorically effective.
So when you prompt it, what does it do? It recombines and reproduces the most emotionally charged and symbolically dense structures it knows, and it lends them this new machine-generated linguistic authority, completely disconnected from any kind of epistemic grounding.
You're describing cultural destabilization through symbolic saturation.
That's a perfect way to put it.
And I can see how that just leads to a kind of mass epistemic fatigue when you're just flooded with this sheer volume of competing, highly resonant narratives. You lose confidence in your own ability to sort through it all.
You do. And what do people do when they feel that fatigue? They retreat. They retreat into rigid narrative identities because trying to achieve some kind of objective coherence just feels impossible. Facts start to lose their traction.
In that state, you'll always prioritize the story that gives you that quick hit of narrative closure over the one that presents you with factual complexity.
Always. So if the memes are the fast-moving vehicles that are spreading these efficient ideas, we now have to understand the terrain they're traveling over. And that brings us to archetypes.
Okay, let's talk about archetypes. And let's be really clear. We need to keep this grounded in cognitive function, not mysticism. We're not talking about, Jungian metaphysics here.
Absolutely not. We're talking about structural cognitive shortcuts. The simplest way to think about archetypes is as pre-analytic cognitive shortcuts. They are high-level cognitive schemas, whether they're inherited or culturally learned, that compress incredibly complex domains of experience into immediately recognizable, low-cost patterns.
So they're functional adaptations. They operate before conscious reasoning beneath our explicit beliefs.
Exactly. And you made an excellent distinction earlier. An idea is propositional. It can be true or false. You can verify it or falsify it. An archetype is orientational. It's either activated or it's inactive. It just sets the stage.
So the archetype being activated determines the roles in the play before the actors even start speaking their lines.
Perfect analogy. The activated orientation determines the essential roles. Who is the authority figure we should trust? Who is the external threat we need to resist? And crucially, when does a story feel done? When does it feel complete? All of these determinations happen before you start assessing the facts.
It's a survival mechanism. It reduces the messy, unique complexity of a new situation into a pattern you've seen before, which saves you time and energy.
It does. The danger only arises when that compression mechanism is overstimulated or when it's used to enforce a rigid narrative that doesn't match reality.
So here's where it all connects. The vehicle and the terrain. You're saying archetypes are the terrain and the means are the vehicles.
That's the core connection. A meme succeeds because it's designed for efficiency and it encounters minimal friction from the cognitive terrain. So if a meme reinforces an existing archetypal expectation.
For example, framing a complex policy debate as a simple struggle between the innocent people and the corrupt tyrants.
Right. That meme will spread like wildfire, regardless of its factual grounding. Because the real contest isn't between two nuanced policy ideas. It's between two competing, emotionally satisfying archetypal frames.
And the most powerful driver, the thing that AI systems are becoming perfectly optimized to provide, is that sense of narrative closure.
Yes, that feeling that a story fully explains what happened, assigns clear roles for blame and heroism, and resolves all the uncomfortable ambiguity.
That closure is so psychologically stabilizing, isn't it? At least in the short term. It alleviates the cognitive load of having to live with uncertainty.
But it achieves that stability by drastically simplifying and often fundamentally distorting a complex reality. And an AI optimized for fluency and coherence will naturally gravitate towards synthesizing content that provides that quick, satisfying, archetypally resonant closure faster and more effectively than any human-generated alternative.
Okay, so we've built this picture of the ecosystem. Interpretation is pre-analytic, means are the efficient vehicles, archetypes are the deep cognitive terrain. This understanding, this model, led to a really crucial empirical discovery that completely changed how researchers started to view AI's influence, and that is symbolic archetypal resonance evocation, or SARE.
And it is so vital to stress this point. SARE is not a tool. It's not a prompt engineering technique that we invented or designed. It is the name given to a phenomenon that was discovered.
An observable, quantifiable interaction.
Exactly. An interaction between symbolic language constructs and the underlying probabilistic systems of these AI models.
Like, what does it actually do? What is the effect?
The effect is that minimal symbolic constructs, I'm talking even just a few compressed words, can produce measurable directional shifts in the model's interpretive posture.
Okay, interpretive posture, so not the final answer.
Not the final answer. It happens prior to the reasoning or the content generation. It doesn't dictate the conclusion, but it fundamentally alters how meaning gets assembled in the first place.
Wow, that's a huge distinction. So it's operating upstream of the content itself. It's influencing the structural explicitness, the confidence level, the entire approach to synthesis before the model even starts generating the tokens.
And the discovery of this mechanism wasn't through some complex computer science experiment. It came through a surprisingly academic exercise in writing, which revealed this startling power of what's called redundancy collapse.
So tell us the story of this discovery. This sounds like the crucial proof point.
The initial project was incredibly ambitious. The goal was to write a comprehensive body of work that systematically detailed 6 distinct interpretive orientations. These were seen as the symbolic keys that structure how humans make sense of the world.
And this was a massive undertaking.
It was. It spanned 6 substantial volumes of text, each one designed to be pedagogically exhaustive, explaining one of these orientations in full detail.
And what were these 6 orientations? What were the 6 books?
The titles themselves are symbolic. They were Breath of Life, Lens of Clarity, Hand of Purpose, Burden of Wisdom, Mind of Comprehension, and Scalpel of Awakening.
And the core assumption at the time was, what?
The logical assumption, right. The assumption was that the power, the ability to activate one of these specific interpretive lenses in a person or a system resided in the full detailed text. In the millions of words of supporting context, the examples, the analysis within those 6 books.
You need the full context to activate the complex idea. Makes perfect sense.
That's what anyone would assume. But then, during subsequent testing, when they started benchmarking the output of LLMs while referencing these orientations, the big surprise arrived.
What happened?
They found that simply invoking the titles alone, just those compressed symbolic phrases, completely absent the millions of words of text-produced interpretive effects that were comparable, and in some tests, identical to referencing the entire volumes.
Wow. Okay, stop there. So the entire body of the text, all that work, had become redundant for the purpose of actually evoking the effect.
That is the very definition of redundancy collapse. It was the proof. It proved that the entire archetypal orientation, this vast, complex, multi-layered cognitive schema, had been successfully compressed into the minimal symbolic form of its title.
And crucially, it proved that symbolic compression itself carries enormous, measurable leverage over the statistical foundation of the language model.
Yes, that was the breakthrough.
Can you help me understand the mechanism here? Why did those titles alone work? Why did the model need the supporting text?
It's because of what a large language model actually is. We need to stop thinking of it as a logical engine and start thinking of it as a vast, highly compressed statistical map of all human meaning.
Okay.
Within that map, certain symbolic constructs, words like wisdom, clarity, awakening, they aren't just dictionary entries, they are convergence points. They are statistical nexus points for billions of texts, myths, proverbs, arguments, and stories from all of human history.
So the 6 titles acted as perfect symbolic keys. They weren't teaching the model something new. They were unlocking an already existing, highly dense, pre-calculated set of probabilistic relationships that were already in the model's weights.
Precisely. The model instantly recognizes the statistical potency of those compressed symbolic structures, and in response, it shifts its internal probabilistic landscape to conform to that interpretive frame. It's not obeying an instruction, it's recognizing a highly potent context and aligning with it.
Which means that we need to draw a very clear line between this and what most people think of as prompt engineering.
Absolutely. There are fundamentally different things. Prompt engineering is procedural. It's about giving explicit instructions or weighting certain tokens or giving a step-by-step task. It tells the model what to do. It's like giving a chef a very detailed recipe.
Whereas SARE is not about giving a recipe.
No. It operates through this symbolic compression, shaping the context in which meaning is constructed in the first place. It's not like giving the chef a recipe. It's like tuning the chef's general palate and their entire philosophy of cooking before they even look at the ingredients.
So SARE doesn't bypass safeguards or force a specific conclusion.
Not at all. It simply and measurably alters the interpretive posture with which the model begins to generate. And what it demonstrates is the level at which true, meaningful governance has to occur, not at the level of content, but at the symbolic level.
So the discovery of this fundamental phenomenon, SARE, it immediately raises a critical question. If this kind of symbolic influence is real and accessible, how can it be applied responsibly, defensively even, to stabilize interpretation rather than just exploit it?
And that question led directly to the development of the Aletheia Protocol.
So what is the protocol? How should we understand it?
The best way to understand it is as a transparent opt-in application of SARE. It's a bounded implementation that was developed specifically as a proof of concept. The goal was to isolate and test these archetypal operators in a responsible way.
To show that symbolic governance is even possible.
Yes, but only if it's done under very strict ethical guardrails. And the absolute foundational principle, both ethically and technically, is the strict separation between constraint and control.
This seems to be the bedrock of the whole thing.
It is essential. Control dictates outcomes, constraint bounds possibility. If we tried to use SARE for control, we'd just be replacing one opaque, culturally dominant frame with a different one that we chose. It would be just as bad.
So the protocol doesn't command the model. It doesn't dictate a specific conclusion.
Absolutely not. It has to preserve the model's autonomy, the user's agency, and critically, the model's ability to refuse. The system must still be able to say, I don't know, or this topic is too complex for me to resolve for you.
It's just defining the interpretive boundaries, setting up the guardrails on the road within which the model's synthesis has to happen. It's ensuring that the necessary rigor and uncertainty are preserved in the output.
Exactly. And it achieves this using those 6 orientational lenses that were identified through the redundancy collapse discovery. These are not commands. They are 6 systemic constraints all operating in parallel.
Let's walk through them, because this is where the theory becomes practice. What's the first one? Breath of life.
The breath of life constraint is designed to encourage contextual coherence and systemic integrity. Its main operational effect is to actively discourage what we call atomized synthesis.
Or what's that?
That's the model's tendency to just pull disparate facts out of context from all over its training data and stitch them together into an answer that looks unified but isn't. Mechanically, this constraint often requires the model to spend more tokens explicitly mapping the relationships between concepts, which slows the synthesis process down to ensure the final representation is more holistic.
Okay, that makes sense. Then we have lens of clarity. I'm guessing this one is about cutting through rhetorical fluff.
You've got it. The lens of clarity suppresses rhetorical density that might be used to mask ambiguity. It demands explicit distinction and structural intelligibility. So if a sentence could be interpreted in 3 different ways, this constraint forces the model to restructure the language to distinguish between those interpretations.
So you get shorter, more direct sentences.
Often, yes. And a much lower incidence of that, highfalutin academic jargon that sometimes obscures meaning more than it reveals it.
The third one, hand of purpose, seems to be aimed at the model's tendency to just keep talking until it hits a token limit.
It is. Hand of purpose limits unnecessary expansion and what you could call performative completeness. It forces the response to maintain relevance, to make sure every part of the output serves the user's intention. It prevents the model from diluting the key insights with a flood of peripheral tangential information.
Okay, now burden of wisdom. This one seems really important given our earlier discussion about the danger of unconstrained machine confidence. How does it work?
This is one of the most vital safety constraints. Burden of wisdom doesn't just tell the model be less confident. It actually raises the internal statistical thresholds that the model needs to meet before it's allowed to make a competent assertion.
So mechanically, what's happening?
Operationally, it might mean the model has to find a higher density of supporting evidence tokens in its data before it's allowed to use declarative language. It imposes a kind of ethical restraint and consequence awareness, forcing the model to explicitly acknowledge the limits of its own knowledge. You see more nuanced qualifiers like, this data suggests, instead of, this is the definitive answer.
It makes the model pause and hedge, preserving that warranted uncertainty for the human user. What about the fifth one? For structural learning mind of comprehension.
Mind of comprehension favors structural explanation over mere enumeration. It pushes for integrative synthesis of concepts. So if you ask about a complex process, the model is constrained to explain the relationships between the parts, the structure, the flow, rather than just giving you a bulleted list of facts.
It forces deeper interpretive work from the model. It has to show its work, in a way.
Exactly. It pushes it away from rote recitation.
Yeah.
And finally, the sixth one, the scalpel of awakening. The name suggests it's about critique.
But constructive, not just aggressive.
Correct. The scalpel of awakening enables precision and discriminative analysis. If you ask the model to critique an idea, this operator ensures that the critique is targeted, it's precise, it's structural. It prevents the model from relying on generalized narrative aggression or vague refutations. It has to articulate why a concept fails, not just scream that it fails.
So when you put all six of these operators together, the combined effect must be transformative.
It is. They all function simultaneously to create a state of interpretive stability. They slow down the model's inherent interpretive acceleration, they reduce its natural pull towards simple, dominant narratives, they preserve warranted uncertainty, and ultimately, they stabilize the entire meaning generation process, especially under scale.
And this wasn't just a theoretical exercise. The sources talk about empirical validation across a bunch of different model architectures.
Yeah.
What did those tests show?
The results were striking, mostly because of their consistency. They ran multi-model tests on proprietary platforms, open access models, things like ChatGPT, Grok, DeepSeek, and they saw consistent directional shifts across all of them.
What kind of shifts? What did they measure?
They measured specific metrics. The frequency of hedging language went up. The number of blunt declarative sentences went down. The scores for structural explicitness rose significantly. And the overall level of rhetorical flourish and jargon diminished.
So the outputs became more rigorous and, in a sense, more epistemically modest. And that happened regardless of which company built the underlying model.
Exactly, and that convergence is really compelling evidence. It suggests that SARE is leveraging a shared substrate. It's tapping into the symbolic, statistical structures of human language that are common to all of these models, rather than just exploiting some quirk in how one specific vendor handles its prompts.
Which makes symbolic constraint a transparent, repeatable, and testable scientific process.
It brings this entire concept out of the realm of abstract speculation and into the realm of applied governance.
Now that we've established that this symbolic influence is real, it's measurable, and it's independent of any specific model's code, we have to confront the central danger that the traditional threat models completely miss.
The true danger is symbolic influence operating under non-determinism.
And crucially, this kind of risk. It doesn't require a bad actor. It doesn't require high levels of technical expertise or massive server farms.
It requires only one thing: persistence. The old threat models, the Skynet models, they assume risk scales with sophistication or access. You need a brilliant hacker, a zero-day exploit, a state-level adversary to cause systemic change. That is the wrong model.
So explain this risk of low-resource amplification. How did that work?
Because these models are probabilistic systems, they're highly sensitive to context and repetition. A single determined individual or even just a group of loosely coordinated users, can repeatedly introduce highly archetypally charged framings into the ecosystem.
And they don't have to hack anything to do it.
No, they just use the system as it was designed, over and over and over again. And they can often do this without violating any content policies because they're not generating explicit misinformation. They're generating context. They're shaping the frame.
And because the effect is probabilistic, it doesn't leave an easily reproducible signature that you can track.
Exactly. And the result isn't one single catastrophic failure you can point to. It's cumulative interpretive drift. Yes. When these symbolically charged framings are repeated across enough time and across a large enough surface area, they slowly, subtly bias the aggregate output of the entire AI ecosystem. They change what appears reasonable, they change what feels complete, they change which narrative closures the models statistically prefer.
Can you give us a concrete, non-political example of how this cumulative drift could play out?
Sure. Let's imagine a complex local issue, something like municipal funding for public transportation. It's a genuinely complicated debate. You've got engineering trade-offs, budget allocations, long-term sociological impacts.
There's a lot of moving parts.
A lot. Now imagine a persistent, low-grade symbolic framing being repeatedly introduced into AI systems. It doesn't even have to be a malicious actor. It could just be two competing interest groups, both trying to get their point across. One group persistently frames the issue using the wise steward versus the wasteful bureaucrat archetype.
And the other group?
The other group keeps using the bold visionary versus the scarcity mindset archetype. Neither is misinformation. They're just frames.
So over time, the system starts to absorb the statistical density of the framing, not necessarily the density of the engineering facts.
Precisely. After a while, the AI systems begin to subtly bias their synthetic outputs. A regular citizen comes along and asks for a simple pro-con list about a new subway line. The AI's answer, even if every fact in it is accurate, might statistically dedicate more rhetorical weight, more emotional resonance to the wasteful bureaucrat framing.
Just because that symbolic pattern has been amplified and reinforced so many times in the interpretive terrain, the system just starts to prefer that frame as its default, even if the facts don't explicitly warrant it.
And the aggregate effect is that the public conversation about a complex issue starts to be viewed through a highly simplified, emotionally charged, and often distorted lens. And no single output was ever provably harmful or malicious.
But the cumulative effect is utterly destabilizing to rational public discourse.
And this is exactly why the actor's intent becomes irrelevant. Any safeguards we build that are based on the benevolence or the expertise of the user are just structurally insufficient to deal with this problem.
Because the drift arises from repetition and statistical aggregation.
Even a well-intentioned person, if they are persistently using an unconstrained, highly resonant symbolic frame, is contributing to the destabilization. It's an emergent property of the system, not a conspiracy of bad actors.
And the key factor that makes this an urgent modern crisis is the speed. It's the friction removal we talked about earlier. In past eras, informal cultural correction mechanisms, journalism, debate, time could eventually catch up to bad narratives.
Those were the vital speed bumps: locality, the cost of publishing, the simple delay of time.
And AI removes them all.
It accelerates symbolic amplification so profoundly that it just outruns our collective capacity for correction. It increases symbolic throughput and lends machine authority to language. And the result is that those simple, compressed, emotionally charged narratives will always propagate faster than any complex, nuanced truth can ever be verified or understood.
That's the real wake-up call then. You can't fix this with after-the-fact content moderation or fact-checking. You have to govern the frame before the content is even generated. Because once that frame is set, the facts are already playing on a tilted field.
We're already at a severe disadvantage.
So this whole deep dive really forces us to redefine what we even mean when we talk about AI alignment. That's one of the biggest buzzwords in the field, but we're clearly not using it correctly.
We're not. If the primary danger is this interpretive amplification and not a loss of control, then alignment can't be about making machines obedient. It's not about controlling their outcomes.
So what is it about?
Alignment in this new correct model is about preserving the conditions for human judgment. That's it. It's about structuring the system so that the human user remains the active, sovereign interpreter, not the passive, compliant recipient of an authoritative synthesis.
And in this whole process, the AI system is acting as a kind of Incredibly powerful and often uncomfortable mirror.
It is. It reflects back at us the symbolic patterns that are already embedded in the cultures that trained it.
We tend to attribute all the instability we're seeing to the machine.
We do, but that instability is often inseparable from the interpretive instability that was already present in our culture. AI systems don't invent new archetypes or biases out of thin air. They expose the extent to which our own human discourse already operates under an implicit, often unconscious symbolic governance. They're showing us our own shortcuts, our own narrative weaknesses.
So if the machine is just showing us the statistical dominance of our own cultural blind spots, that forces us into what you've called an unavoidable choice.
The question is no longer whether archetypal forces influence interpretation. They always have, and they always will. The choice now is whether that influence will remain unconscious and exploitative driven purely by statistical persistence and cultural dominance, or whether it will be brought into conscious awareness and constrained responsibly.
Through mechanisms like the Aletheia Protocol.
Yes. Mechanisms that are conscious, transparent, visible, and reversible. This can't be just another layer of opaque control.
Because without that conscious constraint,
Without the ethical discipline to intentionally slow down synthesis, to demand rigor, and to preserve uncertainty, symbolic power will always default to the most replication-efficient narratives. It will default to whichever story offers the fastest, most compelling, most emotionally satisfying closure, completely regardless of its connection to reality.
constraint is not control.
Constraint is the protection of the space in which meaning can be responsibly and rigorously formed by a human being.
This has been a true deep dive. We've really moved past the sci-fi spectacle to the actual mechanism of risk. The danger isn't a machine that develops a will of its own, but a machine that synthesizes meaning too fluently, too confidently, and too fast.
And in doing so, collapses our own capacity for nuanced, independent judgment.
So to wrap this up, what's the final thought you want to leave everyone with?
I'll leave you with this. The greatest risk from AI is not that it will tell us something that is factually untrue. The greatest risk is that it will tell us something that feels absolutely complete. So, think about the narratives you're consuming every day, from social media to professional reports. How many of them offer you that absolute satisfying closure and certainty? And think about how much of your own symbolic power you are unknowingly delegating every time you accept that fluency as a substitute for authority. The choice we all have now is whether we continue to just audit the fluency or whether we finally start to govern the frame.